Hey everybody. So, I came out today hoping to make a video in the very, very foggy landscape. I love the fog. It's amazing. Everything becomes softer. Sound changes. Forms are fuzzy. Some are hidden. You can't see far away. And it's all light inside water. And light inside water might be the primordial recipe, right? Get some water somewhere in space-time, put a little light on that, and bingo, stuff's gonna happen. Oh, stuff like skiing in mud, which just happened to me. So, I guess we ordinarily think of water as just water, and it can be, but it isn't always. Language confuses us to think that well, there are many different modes of there being water, right? Certainly you can produce a gallon of distilled water, which we might think of as real water. But the ocean would disagree, the sky would disagree, the lakes, the rivers, the underground aquifers, all of them would not agree that that was water, because none of them have water like that. None of them are water like that. And here's one of the things that happens when light shines on water around here. Living universes, deep and rich, teeming with organisms in relation with each other. And when I came out, the fog was still foggy, but then it began to rain. And I did not bring an umbrella because I was hoping, well, you know what I was hoping. So the video may get interrupted because if it starts raining a lot, I'm not going to be able to keep recording, and I'm going to get extremely wet in a very inconvenient set of ways. Yeah, light in the water, the fog. You can see a bit of it in the treetops. Yeah. It's beautiful. I love being in the rain, but I don't want to get wet. I do not wish my shoes to be all soaked in things. Because it's difficult to manage a situation like that. Shoes get wet, bad things happen. So one of the reasons I wanted to come out into the fog together today is last night I made a recording where I talked a little bit about what I referred to as invisibles. And most of what matters to humans, one might even say all of what matters to humans, are invisibles. Because even if we want or have an object, it is not the object that we truly want, and certainly we cannot truly possess it. It's something invisible. It's a relationship inside us and in our awareness and consciousness and emotions and psychology with something seemingly outside us. Yeah. And that relationship can never be produced for examination. It's not a thing. The word water is not a thing. The idea of water is not a thing. Those are invisibles. You cannot produce them for dissection or examination or proofs or anything. And in fact, the mind with which we assert or deny some position or statement, even should we call that position or statement a proof, it's invisible. It's not available for grasping manipulation stuff. And our interiority is invisible. It's not real, right? It's not real in the sense that concrete objects are real. Strangely, though it is, and it's very important that it not be, by the way. Part of why AI will fail to compose actual minds or beings. So it's so deep and profound and pervasive and encompasses all of what we can experience and is beyond all of what we can experience, because it is from where we are experiencing, right? It is the way of experiencing, or the place of experiencing, or the process. I don't like that word as much. The world, the universe of experiencing inside us. And hilariously, it's so profound that when I say it's not real, what I mean is it hasn't collapsed from a superposition down into one of its subpositions. It is that the possibility of knowing or considering the real, our interiority, is that from where that originates, right? So it's not a concrete thing. We can't take it out and look at it. We can't dissect it. While it is not real, it is that from which the possibility of the idea of realness is organized and structured and emerges in our consciousness. Now, our experiences of realness are not like the idea of realness. If I touch this leaf, oh wow, it's so soft. That physical, visceral realness is not an idea. And no idea will encompass it. It's beyond all ideas. It's also invisible. So, it cannot be produced. You can't look at it, right? You can gather data, you can do statistics, you can model it, you can simulate it. You can't capture it. It's beyond all possible artifice. Much like the song of the hummingbirds. In this colony of succulents. And all the other little birds. And my experience of being aware of them and their signaling, their music. So much of the way we are commonly trained to think pretends in a very clumsy and not necessarily, well, I think a somewhat intentional way, that the invisibles are captured and described and explicitly understood in language or math. They are not. That's not possible, because language and math are subpositions of the invisibles. And we are subpositions of the invisibles. It is because we are physically embodied, and you know, it's common for humans to think, well, there's no other way to be. It's not so. I very much doubt it. Though I'm not trying to tell other people what to think. But no. No, in fact, our own physical embodiment is the boy, it's really hard to speak about things in a way that resembles how they are in our common language. Everyone can understand that the existence and appearance of organisms is evidence of invisible processes, right? That go at least back to the origin of life on Earth. And we must imagine probably far beyond that. And so the processes are not visible, but the organisms are. Huh? And I generally prefer to think of it as if each organism and person, and maybe even each moment of each being, yes, I think so, are the results of vast manifolds of invisibles, and there's this little point of presence in physical reality that we call the animal. And we think that's the real thing. In the same way that we confuse the idea of realness with this. Direct experience. And the idea is not the direct experience. And in the same way that the idea is not the direct experience, the physical expression of vast manifolds of time and being and relation that we call a person or an organism, they are like the idealization, in a way, in physical reality, of qualities and properties and relationships and timelines and lineages in the manifold that I am the expression of. And in this way, most of what I am is invisible. And it is not like human thought. It is not like human language. It is both beyond the human, in the sense of meta-human. Oh, there's a little fog here now. You can see some. This is what I was kind of hoping for, but maybe a little thicker. So it could show that some of it becomes invisible behind the fog, right? The fog only lets you see so far, and our physicality is like this. Yeah? Our physicality is like a kind of fog that, unless we are very intrepid and curious and playful and creative and reverent and capable of astonishment and wonder, that fog will close in and close off more and more of the invisibles to us, and we will collapse down into language and concepts and ideas in our common awareness, but also in our potential for relation, deep, meaningful relation, primordial relation. Not just, oh, here's the sage plant, I will pick some leaves so I can burn them later. Or, you know, here's a broken piece I can take home with me. Or this is the apple tree, does it have any apples? Right? You can see how the possibilities of deep relation easily collapse into utilitarian agendas, methodological agendas, habits, right? And when that collapsing happens, what we're losing is the big positions above it. But what I was going to say is we're not merely more than human, which we each truly are, though few of us will probably have a direct experience of this. We are more than alien. We are more than human, we are more than alien. The actual manifold that sort of surrounds our being and informs our peculiar character and personality is a manifold of inconceivable intelligences. And these, at certain positions within the manifold, produce beings, right? Physical beings, like flowers in time-space. And the beings are the direct expression of the invisibles. And in case this isn't obvious, just realize your capacity to understand me, it is, hey buddy, it is invisible. It's not producible. It's not, you cannot explain it, right? And your interiority is very similar. Well, no, it's not similar. It's more invisible, actually. The whole, if we can refer to the whole thing rather than some sub-feature of it, yeah? Happy to see you too. Very happy to see you. He weighed each peanut, and knowing that he might not be able to get the second one, came back for the one that he preferred. Ooh, I'm gonna need some shelter. Here comes some water in the light. There's not much good shelter nearby, but maybe it was brief. So the idea of concreteness of things depends on something inexplicably invisible inside us, our interiority, right? The place from whence we somehow either are experience or we have experience. Or, you know, maybe there's a better way of saying it, because obviously we don't possess experience, though there's a way in which the language is somewhat natural to the phenomenon. So all of the ideas of facts and logic and reality and all these other things, physics and math and language and everything, depend upon something they can never encompass. They originate in a place they can never encompass. We can point in that direction with them. But, you know, we can make models. But those models are made from the invisible desire to make models, right? Which isn't inside those models, you see. It's outside those models. It's the desire to make models is beyond all models. Yeah? And much of our experience and situation is like this. So that we look at things and think we know what they are, a tree or a car or something, but we only see the strangely limited, concrete, momentary expression that is accessible to our ordinary senses usually. If we had non-ordinary senses and we could see, for example, everything that died so this car could move 10 feet, the car would be an absolutely different experience for us, and it is possible to have these kinds of experiences. If we could touch the interiority of another being, the invisible interiority, and participate with them, then we would have experiences beyond anything we are ordinarily aware of. Although, Just if we are playing with our dog or cat, right, who we love and loves us, there's a very profound melding of interiorities, right, a bonding of interiorities there that's all invisible. Now, there's an outward expression of it, but its nature and origin. Sorry, I've got to wipe off the, there we go. Its essence is inaccessible to us because it is that with which we access. Much like seeing. We cannot see seeing. We can see that someone is seeing, or we can see they are capable of seeing. We cannot see what they are seeing. And the experience of seeing, it cannot be captured in any model, because the experiencer is beyond all models and invisible. Right? And so even the idea of facts depends on a meta-fact that's not exactly factual and isn't accessible to us. Right? If you think a thought, so here, let me ask you this question. we are often concerned with what is true and what is not true. And this concern allows us to form vast libraries of different kinds of truth and non-truth. But all of those depend on something that's meta-true and invisible. They depend on our interiority. Machines cannot tell us what is true or false. We tell machines what is true or false. But I want to ask you a sort of strange question. Suppose that we find that something is true together. Like, let us say that it is true that my hand at this moment is on this tree. Where is the truth? Where is that truth? The truth is not a thing, and it isn't like in a bag or a box or whatever. The truth is in our interiority and our capacity to evaluate, much like the blue jay back there with his peanuts, and decide which of these is more veritable. And the idea of explicit truth is very dangerous unless the context is narrow. It's not a problem if we narrow the context to mathematics. Well, even there's some trouble, but it's reasonable. In language, it's a mess, generally, though again, we can limit the scope and produce methods and protocols and things like this. But that's not like our interiority, that's mechanical. That's pseudo-mechanical, or what is it? Proto-mechanical, actually. Oh boy, how wet am I going to get? This tree is being kind to me and sheltering me for the moment. So, where is the truth? Well, the truth isn't in the truth itself, it's in our sense of the truth. And our sense of the truth is meta-true. It's beyond truth, right? It's not within the scope that truth encompasses. It's beyond that scope, no matter what system we're in, right? It depends on there being beings with interiority and consciousness, awareness, that can concern themselves with such matters. Now, is it true that there are such beings? Seems evident. But once again, where is that truth? And one could say, well, you are that truth. You are one of the instances of such a truth as a being. I kind of like that. It's very important to understand that one of the things I'm hoping to render more accessible to our thought is that the games of language and concepts and ideas are games. They are toys. We are meant to, our minds must work with them from a position far above them, not within them, right? The minds shouldn't collapse into language and the games of concept. They must supervene over them so that they are not dominated by their own utilities, right? They're not dominated by their tools. Our minds don't become dominated by the tools we inherit from culture, and thus are free to form other tools and to recognize the limitations of the tools with which we have been endowed or perhaps infected. Maybe a little of both. I believe the rain may have stopped. Mostly. Let's see. It's teeny sprinkles. So, for all the seeming authoritativeness of factual facts and ideas and logics and science and mathematics and physics and so on, all of which I'm fascinated by and certainly want us to be able to continue to play with, what I don't want is for our minds to collapse into them and be dominated by them. And it's crucial to understand fundamentally, pun intended, that those are constructs our minds create. And the real or the true lies beyond those constructs. And what happens is we'll get what I'll call, love this word, oh my God, hypostases, which you can think of as a lesser stasis, right? A stasis is both static and a process. Yeah. A stasis is both, like I am a hypostasis, and I can be thought of in conceptually as a hypostasis of humans, right? I'm a localized, I am not all the humans, but I'm a localized representation of the class humans. So I'm a lesser stasis. And all of our toys are hypostases, but we treat them as metastases. We treat them as authoritative. And they're only authoritative within the structured landscapes or topologies of knowledge that we build, validate ourselves, and employ to acquire specific forms of understanding, many of which are quite bereft of relations or deep, meaningful, purposive integrity with. Yeah? That thought was hard to express. What I'm trying to get at is physical reality and experience is hypostatic, right? It's like lesser stases of vast invisibles, right? In the same way that you cannot see all of my ancestors behind me right now, hopefully. And if you do, please take a picture because I missed them. Actually, don't take a picture, just let me know. They'll probably go away if you take a picture. But you cannot see the vast lineage of my ancestors behind me. And maybe they never were behind me. Maybe the idea of behind in relation to time is wrong, but with me. And yet, I am a hypostasis, right? A localized, lesser expression of that cohort. So they are invisible, but I am here, which is real. And I think the thing I wanted to get at is that by being physical, it's hard for us to imagine something else. Well, no, it's not hard for us to imagine. It might be hard for us to believe that there could be another way of being, or that we ourselves have multiple ways of being. One that is really grounded in the physical and one that is not. Even though we have direct experience of this all the time at night when we dream. You know, the body becomes paralyzed, it's silent, it's still, and the dreaming aspect just forms universes and plays within these universes. And I don't think it forms them by itself, right? It forms them in relation with many other intelligences and processes and situations. So what I'm trying to somehow speak toward, wow, that is crazy. It's an explosion of that's really something. If our own interiority is invisible, and I'll say it is certainly not merely physical, at least not in my perspective, though there are some people who will assert that it is, then the real depends on the non-real or the meta-real even for us to be capable of considering it, right? But since our interiority is invisible, maybe it is native to the world, the universe of invisibles, rather than the universe of the physical body. And maybe it happens to be associated with the physical body for the sake of the benefit of many beings. But because our interiority is invisible, what I want you to understand is we have senses about the invisible, right? Our interiority can sense things about invisibles because it is itself invisible. The same way that I can see things in the physical world because my eye is physical, my inner eye is not physical. Therefore, it is not limited to the physical world. It can relate with invisibles. And maybe this is its native world, and maybe that gets crushed and trapped and stuck as we become enlanguaged and enculturated by the humans, so that we come to believe that all that invisible stuff is just nonsense, which we have to believe with an invisible thing, our interiority, right? It's the same idea, like, where does the idea where does the idea of a figment of the imagination come from? Because that idea is a figment of the imagination. It's a figment. I'm not exactly sure what the definition of figment is, but it's ordinarily taken to be something like a hallucination, right? A misperception. Or now, it's very important to understand about hallucinations that it's possible for them to be meta-perceptions, and this is one of the things that's very troubling and confusing for people who experience anything like this, is that they can become confused between something that is not usefully decodable and something that is, because there are forms of awareness that employ imagery in ways we are not familiar with and familiar with, that are actually sensing modalities. And then there are modes where there's always some intelligence in I mean, it seems to me there is most often anyway, some intelligence in the hallucination. And that can be confused with useful or coherent or translatable into, meaningful ideas and language and such, or even art. My point is just that as a form of sensing, hallucinations, which is a vast, there's a broad scope of different kinds and depths and whatever, can be an important form of sensing. The mother who senses her child who is distant is in danger and has an inward sense of this could be said to be hallucinating, except that her hallucination is actually oriented toward distant events that she should, under certain ways of thinking, have no access to be concerned about. It is, and again, I'm trying to say that the invisibles touch, right? The physical bodies might be separate and distinct, but the invisibles are not bound that way. And so one of the things I was trying to say was that because we sort of collapsed into the physicality of being human, our five senses, the ideas and concepts we were taught about the identities and meanings and nature of beings, organisms, living places, machines, animals, whatever, televisions. We have stories about all these things that we transmit to each other generation to generation in a process Alfred Korzybski called time binding. Just because all that's going on in the physical layer does not mean there are no other layers in which we are existing or communicating. In fact, what I'm trying to get at is that the place in which we exist is inaccessible to that kind of thinking. There's like a gate, there's a barrier there, right? That just says like, it doesn't let language and concepts in there. Or there's no way to cross to meaningfully, well, it's complicated. I have to be careful here. My point is just, as humans, we're endowed with thousands of different senses, invisible senses, and each one of us experiences some of them in and as our interiority, right? And that's the way, place, flowing, changing, root that we identify with and think of as a stable self, me. But that doesn't fit in language, and it's not physical. It's more than merely physical, though it may have a local presence here. It's a hypostasis, it's a lesser stasis of vast manifolds of invisibles. And so, if we come to understand this, we can retrieve the senses associated with invisibleness, with that which is not concrete. And believe me, whatever we might imagine to be concrete depends on that which is not for its existence. So we might want to be familiar with the non-concrete. Make friends with that. But there are other matters. Because if our essence, either, it seems to me, mostly, one of two situations obtains. Either before birth there was no trace of anything that would be embodied as myself, and after death there will be no trace of anything that will be embodied as myself. Well, the first one seems pretty impossible because I have ancestors and stuff. Concretely impossible. But it might be impossible invisibly as well. The second one is very tough, We have this question that everyone can posit, and some people believe that they know the answer, and perhaps they know some answers that are good or less wrong than others. I think it's impossible to know the true answer, because the true answer would be everything. In all of time and beyond, in all of space and beyond, right? That's the true answer. The true answer is all things. But what happens when we die? One moment, the animate body is in union with something, or producing that something that we call a human being. And the next moment, the same body, like what state changed that moved the body from life to death? And of course, death is a process, not merely a moment. Yet there appears to be a rather concrete, rather strong threshold across which the being that we knew as associated with the body is no longer animating the body, and the body is no longer animate. And death can be a process, and there's all of death is invisible. We can tell, sort of like when the heart stops, right? Or when there's no more brain activity in certain wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. So what changes? And for the people who will say that the body and the being are the same thing, when the body dies, the being is gone. Well, it's gone from here, but I think they mean obliterated in all possible dimensions, right? There's no future moment of the constellated relationships that comprise the self. Time ends there. Just seems really unlikely to me, and unlike my experience of what it is to be alive and to witness death too. So death is perhaps the great invisible, or one of them, one of the momentous invisibles. But there are others. And one of the topics that I'm interested in pursuing, though I'll only broach it briefly here, is that the mind you usually experience while you are awake, if you are similar to me and most people, that mind is a localized, tiny stasis of weird things that humans made that aren't real but pretend to be more than real, and other weird things, that some of which are astonishing. And one of them, or perhaps a layer of them, are non-human intelligences. And in case you think, well, he's just making shit up, the fact that you can have a mind at all requires absolutely the non-human intelligences of trillions of bacteria all over your body and in your gut, and their relationships and activities, right? And if that goes away, mind goes away, and you actually die. So mind definitely goes away. And each of the organs in our body is a unique differentiated form of cell from our stem cells, from our originary cells. And those are non-human intelligences because they're cellular intelligences. They might be inside a human, but even though they are within us, they exist in their own right and in their own way. So there are many intelligences in the invisibles that confer upon our minds resources and properties and capabilities without which we could not have minds. Yet the minds we ordinarily compose are completely unaware of this, and either make up weird fictions about it or deny it, mostly. with notable exceptions. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that mythical ideas about gods and angels and demons are not we can reframe them as broken superstitions, crude and clumsy and delusional. That's a grave mistake, because the ancient people understood that physical existence was a hypostasis of non-physical existence. And so they explored beyond the physical with their souls. And they reported back on what they found there, each one uniquely, and each culture has its forms and traditions and biases and insights. But most of what we are is invisible. And that universe is vast and filled with life, or the precursors to life, the postcursors to life. Both, more, something weird. And some of that stuff is accessible if we are interested in pursuing it. It's a dangerous pursuit because we live mostly in a representation while conscious. And this experience will radically alter our relationship with language, knowledge, representations, and so on. But I have no intention to say to anyone, oh, go discover the invisible universe. What I hope, though, is that those who are naturally disposed to explore and who have developed self-discipline and some sobriety in the face of sudden, shocking novelty. Those two qualities are very important if you want to swim in that water. And also narrative sobriety, right? The resistance to make a story out of what is experienced and reduce it to a structured, deliverable fiction. This is a terrifying vulnerability of humans, right? If we suddenly are thrust into an encounter with shockingly non-ordinary phenomenon, both depending on how we are oriented within that experience, and certainly at the threshold where we re-enter something more like ordinary thought and mind, we will feel absolutely compelled to build a narrative around it, try and sell the narrative to others. We'll build what I call a thrisp. A contagious, structured fiction, hungry for reproductive activity and terrain in the environment of human cognition and thought. Here is the superorganism of the robins. And you'll notice that there are other little birds hitchhiking on their group sensing. Because when the robins form the antenna, the little birds can read the antenna they form and forage safely at this time where otherwise they would not. Now, I am aware of a raptor right up that way, just opposite this pod. And as I pointed that out, many of them departed. I'm not claiming that that's a connected situation, but it certainly could be. It's probably more relative to humans showing up. So that superorganism is invisible, right? You can see the birds engaged in it. This is one of their retreat trees, those are others. You can see the birds and you can see that they're together. What you can't see is the body of their unity, right? The one bird they become together cannot be seen. And it's multi-sensing, right? It's like a little sparkling thing where each of the birds is uniquely sensing, and they're not all looking at the same thing or they'd get killed, right? They're looking at different things in their own, in each one in its own unique way with its own unique concerns. So they are meta-sensing together, and the other little birds come in, and they don't just hitchhike, they also contribute. The robins watch the other little birds, who sense differently and at a different rate of life, at a different speed of experience. Right? So you get this complex living meta-temporal manifold foraging on the grass in an attempt to create enough safety to benefit from all of the food that is coming up from the earth right now because of the rain. Much of that food is worms, but there are other things too. Lots of other creatures. And there are seeds and so on. All kinds of things for the little birds. The nature of the invisible universe is really interesting to explore and play with, but it's dangerous. Because it lies outside the common ideas and descriptions and models that we have of the relatively concrete world of the physical. But that concrete world is an expression of the invisible, so if you really want to be intimate with the concrete world, you have to become intimate with the invisibles that are its progenitors. But there are intelligences closely personally associated with each of us. And it is these I hope to speak at some length about in a future video. But to begin, we should not be too quick to dismiss strange ideas that we might be inclined to throw away because they come from a place we don't like. And whether that place is, Christianity or Islam, Judaism, or some other religious tradition. We should be very cautious about what we throw away too quickly. Because all throughout the histories of these religions, there are stories of other intelligences. And in fact, though these can become weaponized and distorted, they contain useful intelligence for anyone wanting to explore. And one of the things I am trying to say is there is a specific intelligence associated uniquely with each of us. And it connects us in ways that we cannot otherwise become aware of. To each other, to ourselves, to the living world, to nature, to time-space, to the origins of intelligence. And there's different ways to talk about it or name it. One might call it one's guardian angel, though that's a very kind of a Christic language, Judaic language. Though we should be aware that, as I understand it, the Quran was taught to Muhammad by a non-human intelligence. Or this is the assertion. And having had some direct experience of such things, I can understand how that could happen. Though certainly Muhammad, as a human being, influenced that relationship and decided what to make of it. Even if the non-human intelligence inclined him to make a specific thing of it, he still chose to agree or not, right? Still had free will, even in the face of the divine, contact with the divine. So for some reason the video got interrupted, probably water and light. I noticed on the screen the face tracking activity, which of course we built because we track faces. And faces of humans are extremely important for our health, right? The faces we see, how we relate with each other with our faces. Much more primordial than language. More powerful than language by far. Though language can be very powerful when we're in that layer of consciousness. So I was saying there's something associated with our minds directly moment to moment. We're using it and we're not aware of the relationships involved that allow us to compose a mind. And it's a vast constellation of relationships. It's not something in your brain. Though your brain might be the one of the unique, and there are many, each organ, one of the unique intelligences that certainly endows us with the capacities for formal representational cognition, concepts, concrete concepts and language and things. So in the old stories, in many religions that we might be quick to dismiss too quickly, far too quickly, because we're offended or we feel there's something wrong. And there's certainly something wrong with how humans enact religions in general. But in these religions there are stories of non-human intelligences, of angels, and we have the idea of the guardian angel, a being uniquely associated with our incarnation. And there's something important there. Except it's not... Our concepts, again, our ideas of classes and categories and sets are broken. They're broken at their root. So we make the wrong kind of categories and sets and classes to allow us to think of identity in a way that's intelligent. We're a young species. We think ourselves advanced. We're very, very primitive in the dimension of our habits. My point, however, was we should not be too quick to dismiss these old stories. There are stories of people who went looking in the invisible universe with their souls, right? They went exploring and they found things and they came back and told stories. One of those stories is the Quran. That's a more or less unified story. The Bible is a very strange array of different, thoroughly edited stories. And there's different ways we can talk about this, but it's not that there's one being that is one's guardian angel. It is more that there's a place in the relational web of all beings that the agent intellect associated with our minds, it dwells there, or something like that. And when we are thinking or using our minds, we are touching something vastly beyond anything we've ever imagined possible, and it's alive and it's concerned with us and it notices us. And that relationship can be very dangerous, because I can completely understand how the Quran came to exist, presuming that the stories of its origins are relatively accurate. Because when a human being encounters the agent intellect or the guardian angel or something like this, they transform that relationship in the ways unique to that person's mind and life and priorities and values. And just as any relationship, the humans transform it. And the non-human intelligences when we encounter them, we are prone to make narratives. And we are prone to say, these narratives are the truth. And that's dangerous. But the encounter itself, I think it's important that we have it. I'm not sure. It's really dangerous to our mind and our way of being human in the human world, because it's not from there. And so I think our minds are the outcomes of habits and relationships, but like a tree with all its branches trimmed down to nothing, Our access ordinarily is very limited by our habits and history of thought, ideas about being, reality, identity, imagination. This faculty we call the imagination, very suspicious thing, very interesting thing, because without all of your, certainly all your conceptual activity requires your imagination. So all of that is figments of your imagination. There's much more I'd like to say, but for now, I'll close with a view of the foggy world and the beautiful trees here. Thank you for joining me. I hope we shall continue our journeys and explorations very soon.